Friends, let's start. You know me already. I don't think that I need to introduce myself. And I would like to speak, I will speak English if you don't.
Ich kann natürlich auch auf Deutsch reden, damit die Dolmetscher auch sehr viel Arbeit haben. But no, I like to play games with interpreters. So today, Stas and the organizing committee asked me to talk a little bit about what is your company worth? And the answer to that question is about this much. So that's a little bit of a joke, but the point is that it's really kind of a process of determining what your company might be worth if you're in the market for establishing that value. And there may be various reasons for establishing a value for a company. It doesn't have to be because you want to sell. It can be for establishing all kinds of parameters around profitability, around KPIs for your own business, so that over time you can compare how your company is doing in terms of a valuation methodology that you might implement consistently. First, though, I want to start with небольшой quiz, or as my
Short quiz.
a little quiz for the audience. True or false? First question, revenues are the most important factor in valuing a company. How many people think that's true? Raise your hand. True? A few people. Okay, the rest of you, false or I don't care, I guess. Okay, second question. Because most companies are private, valuing a company is almost all about negotiation, not data. So it's just a question of negotiating a value for if you're trying to sell a company. Anybody think that's true? Can you read that? Okay, so good. Nobody thinks that's true. Having a few significant, I'm not going to answer these my opinion or give you my thoughts on this. We're just testing the audience right now. Having a few significant marquee, does everyone know what marquee means? Sort of headline, very well-known customers is better than having very small ones. Who thinks that's true? Okay. Everyone else thinks that's false. Working consistently for other language service providers is an excellent way to save costs, diversify revenues, and achieve a higher company valuation. Who thinks that's true? It depends. I'm hearing a lot of answers. It depends. Okay. If a company spent a lot of money developing proprietary technology, it's worth more. The company is worth more. True or false? Okay, quite a few of you think that's true. All right. We're going to look at some of these questions as we talk about this today, and I should say that this is my particular point of view from a certain level of experience, and maybe I'll give you just 2 minutes of background about myself. I started in this business as a freelancer in 1980 and was doing a lot of translation for a long time in-house and as a freelancer. And then I started my own company in the early 1990s in the USA, which I built up working only for end customers and then sold to TransPerfect in 2006. Which then made me part of the TransPerfect family of companies, and I stayed there for 6 years, and we acquired more companies at TransPerfect. You're, I'm sure, familiar with TransPerfect and its history of acquisitions. And so I was involved in M&A, as we call it, mergers and acquisitions at TransPerfect. And then after a short while at Gala as CEO, I was a consultant staying in the industry and working with companies, some of whom were in this room, and helping develop processes or optimize things, look at M&A for them, help them value their companies and so forth. So I have a little bit of experience with this process. Now I am the Chief Operating Officer of United Language Group, and that is a group of companies whose purpose is to, the purpose of the group is to acquire and grow a number of different companies in our industry. So our daily activity, to some degree, is to value companies and to look at where the fit might be with our own. So you might say that this question comes up a lot in my daily life. So, but still, I'm sharing my perspective. I don't want to say that this is the only perspective, or that this is, sort of the, as we say, the gospel truth, the Bible, so to speak. I'm just giving you my thoughts on this, and I hope you will share yours as well. First, we should talk about some of the metrics that companies use to, or that people use to value companies. And when Jura spoke before, he was very careful not to talk too much about financial terminology, but I'm going to have to introduce a little bit of it here, unfortunately, just so we can understand some of the methodologies behind valuing companies. So the first one, and I would say probably most important one, is pronounced EBITDA, typically in the US, and that means earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So basically, that it is a measure of the amount of profit, net earnings, that a company can generate. We can talk more about some of these factors, taxes and depreciation and so forth, but basically it's, from your perspective, as a company owner, the amount of money that you're left with after you spend all your money on your needs. Typically, when you value a company, you look at a historical period for this figure, for this EBITDA figure. Usually it's 36 months. It can be longer. The reason 36 months is because it smooths out some inconsistencies that may happen. We all know this can be a very transactional business, a very cyclical business. And so looking at something over a longer period of time gives a better picture of how a company is doing. Also very important, however, is we all know, look, those of you who are private company owners, we know what we do with our businesses. We have personal expenses sometimes, we have car loans, we have family members who are on our payroll, there's some games we play to avoid taxes and so forth. Everybody knows that. So when you're looking at valuing a company, you have to extract some of that, and you have to think, okay, what does this company actually produce, realistically speaking, from a earnings, from a profit perspective. And so what we do is we adjust or recast the EBITDA into what it would look like if you didn't do all of those things. So if you had the company as a pure sort of standalone company, or indeed as part of a company that's buying you. So it's very important to keep those two things apart, because one is sort of the historical picture as it was, and the other is how will it be if we have a new situation for this company and run it more typically like a pure company. The next important metric is direct margin, and this is gross revenues minus variable costs. And the variable costs are all those people that we give work to outside, the freelancers, the subcontractors, subpodračky, and so forth. All of the money that is spent outside of the company itself to produce the work. So the important question is how much are you paying your contractors, your vendors, your suppliers? Not per word or per page, but overall as a percentage of revenues. Third important figure is gross margin, and this is more involved. This involves gross revenues minus your outside costs and minus your inside costs for producing work. So that inside costs will include things like project managers, in-house translators, desktop publishers, and so forth, because you separate variable expense, which is expense that you only spend depending on language combination or volume and so forth, from people that you have to pay whether they're busy or not. Those are more fixed costs in-house. So that's more a realistic measure of what it really costs to produce your product. And then finally there is what we call SG&A. Sometimes it's just G&A, sales, general, and administrative costs, and this is everything else, which includes your salespeople, but it includes your office staff, it includes your rent, and all your other kinds of costs. So really that's a measure of how efficient the rest of your organization is. And each of these areas is very important because they can determine they have a significant impact on the value of what you have as a company and what you make. So let's look at a couple of these areas a little more in depth. In terms of finance, valuation very much looks at what kinds of spikes, in other words, sharp increases or decreases you may have in your past 36 months, for example. The more inconsistent the numbers are for revenues, the more questions there are from anyone who's valuing, and there are more questions there should be from you, which is, why is our income going like this? And so that's the question of the revenue trends, right? Generally, are they going, like this, but they're going up? Or are they staying steady, but going very high and very low all the time? Or are they, in fact, trending downward? That's why, again, the 36 months is really important. And then, of course, within that is the margins. Are the margins following the trend line, or are they changing for some reason? Are they showing differences at different times, and why? And then, of course, the net income number that goes with that. So is your net income or your net earnings following that trend line? Your EBITDA, is that staying more or less consistent, or is there some reason that it's not? And those are some very basic financial numbers. Obviously, there can be a lot of detail inside that, but these are the kinds of big picture figures that you should look at and that a buyer would look at for valuing what your company is worth. Now, in addition to that, there are other factors. In terms of sales, a very important point is customer concentration. So this is a way of looking at how big a percentage of your business goes to one or more customers. My original plan was to try to ask people to share some of their data here publicly, and I know that's that's maybe a little difficult. So I will try not to do that, but it's always good to look at examples. So, for example, a company might have a customer that is 30% of their revenues, right? 30% of their business. What do you think about that? Is that okay? Is that a little high? Is that a little low? Is that average? What is your thought? Anybody have any?
It is risky anyway, but probably, I don't know, it is highest for me as for Ukrainian market.
Do you have, can I ask you, do you have a customer that has that much percentage, or what's your highest percentage customer of revenue?
Our highest percentage is about 10%.
10, okay, which is less than 30, obviously. Anybody else want to share a number? We have,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Our biggest client has 10% of the revenue.
Okay, biggest client is 10%, so we have two 10%. Any other numbers? Different numbers?
I think it would be between 5 and 7%.
5 and 7%, okay,
Yes.
good. Anybody have any higher numbers?
25.
25?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody's so willing to share, that's great.
I had a client 4 years before, and it was approximately 80%.
Yes.
And then the situation in administration of that client in western part of mother company changed, and we lost that client,
Okay.
and we had decrease in volumes in 3 times a minute.
Immediately, overnight, you had a drop, right? When I started my company, we'll get one more number. When I started my company, I had a client that was 85% of my business. Yeah. Now, I didn't start with them, but they came on board and they started giving me a lot of work. I was extremely nervous all the time about that client, but and for exactly the reason you mentioned, because they stopped their business and all of a sudden everything falls apart.
We have five customers who bring us approximately 40-45% of business, like more or less equally. But for me, I consider it to be risky, to be honest. And I try to monitor every single month the revenue that they bring to us. So every single month we make a report. And if I can see that there is a kind of a drop or increase, I try to find out from project managers what happened, why we had this drop or increase, in order to, like to keep the situation under control.
Right, very good. So there we have about half your company revenues broken up between 4 or 5 customers. And basically, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we look at actual valuation, but it's really important for you to understand what percentage of your revenue comes from which customers, how stable they are, and so forth. And that makes a big difference when you're looking at a valuation perspective. And it also matters what kinds of customers they are. What are the customer types? Are they individuals? Are they companies? Are they LSP, MLVs somewhere else that are giving you their work? Understanding that is really important because there are various values for all of those things. Tied with that is the notion of customer continuity. Right? I say here turnover. I know that in Europe, turnover is the term for revenues, but in America, we don't say turnover. We say turnover to us means change, means that the churn, what we call churn, which means customers change, they don't stay. So it's really important to look at, are your customers consistently staying with you? Are they, can you, so to speak, count on them? There's never a guarantee, but can you count on them? And how much of that turnover do you have? Another key piece of the sales discussion is what kinds of ways do you have to lock in customers? Do you have special technology? Do you have special contracts that you have that guarantee you some kind of business? What are the things in your company that allow you to say, yes, that customer will stay with me because I have 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. To be honest, very few companies have anything in this category that's really worth anything. It's very, very difficult, at least from our experience, I would say, in the Western model, to lock in customers, and they don't like it. So they resist for some reason. But if you have them, that can be an excellent item. And then finally, the differentiators. What makes you different from everybody else? It's the unique selling proposition, which we call USP, which I think is what? Уникальное торговое предложение. So this is really important to establish, and many companies say, oh yeah, we're unique because we deliver high quality, on time, at low cost. Okay, you're not unique. You're not even unusual. In fact, you're like everybody else. That makes you that means nothing to me from a perspective of valuation. So it's very hard to establish what a USP is. How many people in this room think their company has a USP? Okay, we have 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And you may have that, and I've heard a few things, about models and ways things are being done that you could look at as being unique. But please understand, unique. You know what unique means, right? Unique means there's only one in the whole world, and that's you. So if you think about it very, very critically, I used to think that myself, and I think I've almost never met a company that has a USP, truly speaking. But that doesn't mean it's not useful. That doesn't mean it's not valuable. But it's important to understand a USP you know, in the strictest sense, is very, very hard to achieve. And then in operations, when you're valuing a company, you look at what kinds of proprietary technology or processes does a company have. So if you use Trados, of course, you're not, there's nothing special there. If you use a Trados and a Cross and MemoQ and you can use any tool, that's not particularly special either. If you have your own technology and it's very good and it allows you to do things that others can't, now it starts to get more interesting. If you develop your own software, if you have specialized tools, these kinds of things tend to increase the value. Also, in-house resources. What do you have in-house? Do you have specialized linguistic knowledge? Do you have specialized development skills? Do you have things, once again, that are very hard to find outside? And also, it's important because, you know, we're in a business where we're in an industry where many small companies form the industry as a whole. There aren't very many big companies. And so the question of having resources and systems that are redundant, and I mean, this is in a good sense of the word. Redundant means that if something happens, you have extra, you have backup, you have more resources, you can scale. So when you're looking at evaluation of a company, you can say, for instance, today, if we get this much business, everything's perfect. But if we get 20% more, we don't know what to do. Then that's a dangerous area, right? That's going to have an effect on evaluation because you have no redundancy, you have no scalability, as the last point indicates. Those two are tied. So can your production, your operation flex in terms of the volume and scope that your companies are getting from customers? How many people in the room think that their company is very good at adapting to volumes and can manage customer needs that fluctuate significantly? A few, okay. I mean, this is not only for people who own companies, but also for people who work in those companies, right? Because I've been in production. I know what it's like to suddenly have a giant project land and figure out what do we do. So. But the better you are at handling that, the greater the effect on the valuation of your company. And now, from the perspective of the buyer, because this is a very good way of focusing this discussion on the valuation of your company, we can look at the questions they ask. And here are a few. I'm going to give two perspectives, one looking backward and one looking forward. So when they're looking back, customers will ask, why did your revenue go down or up? And if you're in the process of discussing valuation, you need to know the answer to this question. And it might be generally the revenue, it might be a specific client, as you have here in this question. Why did a client's revenue fluctuate? And it's not okay to just say, well, you know, we implemented translation memory, and so over time their revenue went down. I mean, it's the truth, but the fact is that you need to think about, well, what does that mean in terms of the value of this business? Similarly, the question is about margins, right? What happened to margins? Why did they go up or down? And you know, what effect did that have on the business? So you need to understand, are my margins able to be maintained, and why? What are the reasons? An important question, when you compete for a bid, you compete against your competitors, why do you lose? Somebody want to share some answers? Anybody feel like telling us why you lose?
To be honest, I don't think it's price. Maybe we don't provide the solution that customer might expect right now, right? And the competitor might be better at that, or might be more experienced, or might be more flexible.
Okay.
And we
so
don't have this experience at that time.
Your offer is not as useful
good
to the customer.
Yeah,
okay.
Maybe.
That can happen. Yes. Price, of course, is a standard answer too. Yeah. You want to add something?
Да, мы еще иногда сталкиваемся с
Yes, sometimes we have silly purchase procedures when criteria of evaluation during purchase are not relevant. some time ago, we had a meeting with Ukraine and Vodafone. They had a tender, and after that, they were very surprised with the winner of the tender. And now we are preparing the procedure how to select translation company, right?
What we call RFPs, right, or RFIs.
If
Requests for.
if what's
Why can't I think of it all of a sudden? Request for information and request for proposal. So, in other words, give us a quote. But what do the customers ask for, right? Why are they giving these criteria? And that can be a reason. It's important for you to understand when you lose as much as when you win, right? Because when you're valuing a company, we have to be real. We know we're going to lose sometimes, and so the question is: are these losses sort of happening one at a time, or do they happen regularly because of something that you're not doing well enough, or that you haven't done properly in your company? Tied to that is the question of, have you ever lost a customer? So you had the business, you were doing the work for them, and then they stopped coming to you. Who's ever lost a customer? I'm putting my hand up. I've lost a customer. 2 hands on some people. Sure, we've lost customers. Why? What are the reasons? A million? Give me one.
Well, first, say a very popular tendency in the last 10 to 15 years, they selected a huge MLV to cover all of their work and a kind of outsourcing to a single supplier. That's a very typical thing with smaller vendors who do not cover the whole range or the whole spectrum, or they think they're not big enough.
Right.
Well, of course you can screw up. It also happens.
Yep. Make a mistake, do something poorly.
Or instead of negotiating, or instead of doing active support work or management work, you are just doing your job. You're not talking to them, and
Right.
then somebody else, more aggressive, more active, has approached them, offered them a 5% discount,
Right.
and behind the scenes, they change the supplier, and you only learn about it.
When you don't get any more business after a while, right?
Exactly.
So, in other words, lack of interaction with the customer, lack of understanding what they're doing.
Exactly.
All of
Also,
those.
they can all be just stupid, or they had a change in vendor management, and the new vendor management just needs to prove that they're doing things differently.
Right.
So they select new processes, new vendors, whatever. Sometimes it's absolutely accidental and has nothing to do with whatever you are doing.
Right. It is accidental sometimes. I will just tell you that from the perspective, again, of a buyer valuing your company, they're not interested in hearing you say it's accidental. They want to understand, if something happened, did you correct your behavior? Did you correct your communication? Did you correct your process in order for that not to happen again? Because accidents, are not going to provide any valuation support for you. And then lastly, they'll look at, if you invested in a process or technology. I've talked to a lot of companies. They say, I've talked to one gentleman, I won't name him, and he said, well, we spent $500,000 developing an MT solution. So our company's really valuable now. And I hated to say to him, just because you spent $500,000 doesn't mean that that adds that $500,000 to your company valuation. I'm very sorry to tell you. The fact is that there has to be some return on that investment, right? What is it bringing you? Do you have better customers? Do you have more customers? Do you have more business? Is the revenue increased? Do you have higher margins? All of these kinds of questions. If those don't come with that investment isn't worth anything to somebody who's looking at a valuation of your company. So don't make the mistake of thinking that spending a lot of money on something means that it adds that expense somehow adds to value. Now, looking forward, companies also, particularly now, we're talking about buyers, right? So they're interested in the past, but they're even more interested in the future. So their question to you is: do you expect your revenue to go up or down, and why? How many of you regularly do forecasts for revenues? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Really important to look at that because, we all know it's very hard to predict these things, and there are many variables. But understanding what you expect to happen and then what does happen and why those are different is really important. And a buyer will want to hear that you have some understanding of your own market and your own place in that market and how this revenue trend will go. Who are your primary competitors? You need to know that. And not just sort of say, well, you know, they're the usual 5 or 6 companies that everybody knows, because that's a well-known thing. But do you have specific competitors that in a particular area that you watch carefully? I can tell you that, you know, at this point, TransPerfect is so large that everyone names TransPerfect, and certainly we look at TransPerfect as well. But you know, would you name Lionbridge as one of your competitors? Who would name Lionbridge as a competitor? Okay, not so many of you, right? I mean, obviously we're talking about local markets and so forth, but to some degree, even if you're a supplier to Lionbridge, they're a competitor. And it's worth at least keeping that in mind to some degree as you go forward. Very important question. When you join with sell your company or you partner even, what will that do to drive revenue growth? How will those two combined companies create more revenue or create an increase in growth somehow? It's really important to look at that question, and I have an answer ready for a buyer. And which cost savings can you identify? Can you think of some cost savings that if you sold your company to another company, what would your cost savings be potentially? Anybody? Nobody? What could you save money on? Could you save money on, for instance, personnel? Staff? Probably, right? Probably because you maybe have extra people doing the same jobs that you don't need 2, you only need 1, right? Maybe not project managers, but it could be in accounting. It could be in some, you know, sales perhaps, or maybe you wouldn't want to cut on sales, but the point in marketing or something like that, where you think you can combine the forces. What else?
For example, some technicians or experts that are qualified in some things.
Technical people, or maybe some IT support or something. Yeah, possibly.
Maybe we just call it a bottom line. Cut the administrative costs as they may be cut.
Yeah, you could. Administrative costs, there's certainly an area there. So it's important to really identify those because they have specific numbers associated with them. There's a salary, there's taxes, there's a cost aligned with that. Some companies have a very strong model when they buy to find all the cuts possible. They come in and they say, let's get rid of everything we don't need. Our approach is not that. Our approach is more, if we truly have overlap or redundancy we don't need, then yes. But otherwise, the goal is to combine to create a higher value down the road. So looking at what the valuation kind of strategy is from somebody who's looking at your company will help you determine how much of that cost savings you need to look at. And then what do you need to invest in to grow? And this is related to the question, if you were selling, why are you selling? Right? Why do you want to sell your company? And yes, it's very easy to say, well, because I want to have, you know, millions of dollars and retire. But this isn't Silicon Valley, and we're not in that kind of business, and typically that doesn't happen in this industry. So you should have a forward-looking strategy. If I sell my company, I will be able to do what? What will that combination of new companies and new resources do? Has anyone thought about that question if you were to combine with a competitor or get bought by somebody? Have you thought about this? In more than just fantasy dreams? It's really important because when you're valuing a company, you have to say, because as a buyer, I'm investing in your company, right? I'm paying some kind of capital and I'm investing effort. I have to understand what's going to be my return. What are we going to do together that is better than if we stayed separate? And so the more of those things you can develop, the higher the sort of valuation will go. Now, some very concrete discussions for those of you who may be interested in this. Typically in our business, the way a company is valued is on a multiple of EBITDA. That means, as I said before, this EBITDA net earnings number is multiplied by a factor. And the factor is usually a range. That range goes from, for smaller companies, from 3 to 7x is what we say. And for larger companies, it can be 5 to 10 and sometimes even higher. This is kind of a range that gives you some idea of where the valuation might be. And I've given you a couple of examples just to put it in perspective. So if you have a 4 million euro company revenues per year average over the past, let's say, 36 months, and an EBITDA of 400,000, you're looking at a valuation range of 1.2 to 2.8. As you can see, that isn't even close to 1 times the revenues. So when I hear a lot of people talk about, oh yeah, my company has $4 million in revenues, so my company's worth $4 million. No, that's not what that means. You have to look at least at this factor and really establish, does it in fact fit into that model? And this EBITDA, that's how much for you finance people? How much is 400,000 out of 4 million? Seeing if you're awake. 10%, okay. 10% EBITDA, who thinks that's a good EBITDA number? Raise your hand if you think that's good or not bad. Not fantastic. Okay, pretty good, yeah? 1? Only 1? Okay. I'll tell you what I think in a minute. Company B has a $9 million euro revenue with a 1.8 million EBITDA, so a valuation range that goes much higher. How much of an EBITDA is that? 20%. Okay. So I chose these numbers because 10 is kind of the, let's say, minimum. If you're not doing 10, and by the way, Lionbridge isn't doing 10. Lionbridge hasn't done 10 in 20 years. I don't know how long have they ever done 10? I think in the beginning, 6 maybe. 10 is sort of for a company of this kind of size, the minimum that's expected. If you're not doing 10, there are a lot of questions around why. Why aren't you doing more than 10%? And remember what it stands for. It's the earnings after everything. 20 is a good number. 20 is good. Between 10 and 20 is a good range to be in. That's, I would say, a target range for companies in our business. If you're above 20, who in the room is doing more than 20, do you think? Anybody? I'm putting my hand down. I don't know. This is a bit of a secret information, but the fact is very few companies really do 20, above 20. There was a time at TransPerfect when that was the case. That was many years ago. But it's very hard, particularly as you grow, to keep that kind of number up. But so you should be looking in your minds to say, okay, I'd like to be in the 10 to 20% range, because that puts me in a good multiplier range for my company. Now, the multiplier, doesn't just, you don't just pick a number. There are things that make it go up and things that make it go down. So let's talk real quickly about those. Things that can help you drive the higher multiple, that can make that number go from 3 to 4 or 4.5 or something, would be things like a proprietary technology or process, but truly proprietary. A consistent track record of better than average EBITDA. So if your EBITDA is consistently higher than typical numbers, then that will help, that will give people, a buyer, a feeling that there is more value there and probably can squeeze more out of it as we go forward. If you truly have a unique selling proposition that can be identified and measured, then you can add a premium, what's called a premium, to your multiple. Anything you have to lock in a client. At all. And not just, well, we have a contract that says they might send us work. That's not the same thing. If you have something the buyer wants or needs, maybe you have a geography that they want to cover. Maybe you have in-house people that they really want to have on their teams. Maybe you have an expertise in a particular vertical. that's very specialized, for example, that can produce a higher multiple because it's hard to get. It's increasing the demand. And something that a buyer can do better than you. So in my case, when I sold my company to TransPerfect, this was one of the key considerations for me, because when I sold my company, they had something like 200 salespeople. How many did I have? Well, 1.5, let's say. I had 1.5. So I thought, well, with 200 salespeople, I think I can do a lot more. And I also had a special, maybe not a USP, but a special product. So the thought there was, if I get into this company and we combine, I can sell a lot more. And in fact, that's what happened. I was able to raise the revenues for my part of the company much faster by joining forces. And so that creates a value for them, of course, as well. And they look at that carefully. Now, there are things that make your multiple go down. So, very high concentration of customers, bad news. I'm glad to hear that most of you are well under this 20% threshold. But if you have a customer that's that high, you need to look at and say, how do I protect that business? How do I make sure that business will continue, especially after maybe combining with another company? If your EBITDA is all over the place, if it goes from 2% to 20 and then back to 4 and then 6 and 10, then that shows that there's not stability, there's not good management, there's not potentially good resource allocation. And so that means that the risk for the buyer is higher. The risk for valuation is going to increase, and so the valuation number comes down. If you have a very high dependency on resources, there are certain people, certain technologies, certain things that you can't do what you do without. And it could be anything. It could be, well, does anybody have any examples from your own business? Certain translators maybe that you pray and hope don't get hit by a bus because they're your best ones and you can't find anybody to do what they do. That could be something. It could be a particular technology that isn't owned by you but is owned by somebody else that might be difficult. So, for example, TransPerfect made the decision many years ago that they will not use anyone's technology but their own. Now, they do use Trados from time to time, but overwhelmingly, for the biggest part of their work, they use their own technologies, their own TMs, their own MT, everything. Except if the customer requires it. So that leaves them, that pulls away that risk, right? That you're having to use your competitor, namely SDL's technology in your own business. That's a big risk that the company decided to avoid. So it could be similar things like that, but the more of those you have, the more the multiple tends to drop. If you have a lot of customers that come and go, you're constantly having to refill customers, that's going to create risk and create an issue. So really take a look at that number and make sure that it's as low as possible. This is a really important point. Expected existing or future competition. So you might say, wow, we do this great thing that nobody else does. But it may be that nobody else does it yet, and that somebody else is going to do that next month or next year. When are they going to catch up? When are they going to have the same thing you do? And the shorter that window, the higher the risk for your business. So you can't just say, well, this is unique. This is unique to us now, but it has to have some life going forward as well. And then what is your business model like? Is it risky? Is it stable? Is it scalable? All of those things. If you have a business model that depends highly on certain factors, or that is perhaps considered to be more, let's say, older or more kind of worn out, if you will, a tired business model that is not going to be competitive going forward, that creates a lower multiple. So there are other things as well, but these are the kinds of factors that a valuation you will look at and you will say, well, I think that multiple needs to come down because of the risk factors and because of the instability that may be caused. So just to conclude, it's important to keep in mind when you're valuing your company, it may be worth a lot more to you than it is to anybody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. Because most of us, we call it a lifestyle business, right? It means we're doing the work mostly with our teams or sometimes even families, and that's okay. And if we were not there, then the business would probably eventually just close, right? That's all right. That's a lifestyle business. But in terms of valuing your business for someone else to consider, that is not nearly as valuable. So the fact that you can make a nice living, drive a nice car and have a dacha and all kinds of things, that's great for you. But if I'm going to buy your business, I don't care about any of that. I care about all the things we just talked about. And it's important because you need to understand when you are valuing and therefore potentially selling a business, you're moving away from this model of this is my business and my sort of, everything I do is wrapped up in it, and you're moving into a pure business transaction. Another really important point, your clients are not yours. We always talk about наши клиенты, our clients, our. Except they don't think of it that way, really, and they're not yours. And particularly when you're valuing your business for the future, all they represent is potential business sometime later, right? So their value significantly diminishes from their present value for you, because there's no guarantee they're going to be there tomorrow. Virtually no such thing. So keep that in mind, that particularly in terms of how you structure a potential sale, a company is not going to hand you a bag full of grivni and say, see ya, bye. They're going to say, here's a little, here you go, this is some nice money, don't spend it all immediately. Now, you'll stay here and you'll guarantee that this business keeps coming. Because otherwise, I don't want to take the risk. And then finally, your track record is the most important thing that you can show for valuation. Because there is no future. The future doesn't exist. And we have no assets. We have no inventory. So it's all about what have you done. So you can't wake up one day, have a business that's doing okay, wake up one day and say, okay, I think I'm going to sell. I mean, you can, but the point is you need to then be able to look back, say, for the 36 months and say, how does this look? So if you're planning to sell your business and you want to have an evaluation that matches something that will be useful to you, think 3 years ahead and say, 3 years from now, what does my company need to look like so that I can sell it at the highest value? Because it will be too late 3 years from now when you decide, now I think I want to sell. And a side note to that I would say is, and I talk to a lot of people in companies, and they say, well, I'm getting tired, or I've done this for so long, I think I want to stop, or I'd like to do something different, or whatever. Now I think I'll sell. Guess what? That could be the worst time to sell. The best time to sell could be things are going great, we have lots of great clients coming in, we've got lots more business down the road, we're building, we're growing. That's a good time to start looking at these questions, because that's when you can maximize your value. So thank you very much. I hope that provided some helpful hints. Есть немножко опоздали, да? Наверное. Вопросы?
So, if you have questions, I have a question to you. Konstantin Dranch watches us online. That's why he asked me to ask you these questions. So I quote, in England, the translation companies are bought every week. In Russia, it's once a year. So in terms of technology...
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't...
No, not why do companies, why companies are bought.
Right. Why is there a difference between, say, in England and in Russia and Ukraine? I mean, I'm not an expert on Russia, Ukraine by any means, but one of the things might be that my impression is that a lot of the companies in this market, first of all, are focused on the internal market, which is very unstable, And second of all, they do a lot of work for others outside, other LSPs outside of the market. I hate to say it, but the business that you do for companies like, you know, MLVs and so forth, that business is worth nothing to a buyer. Because what happens is when they buy you, that business will go away. Because Lionbridge isn't going to, you know, if we were to buy a company here and then they do a lot of work with Lionbridge isn't going to continue giving work to us. We're a big competitor. They're going to stop. So that revenue, that any profits associated with that are not worth anything. So it may be a question of how much work these companies do for other MLVs. And I also think there's a certain amount of fear about this market. There's a lack of knowledge. There's a lot of ignorance. You know, I was going to share something with somebody I worked with. I won't say who, but we talked about, getting an investment, buying a company in this market. And he said, you know what? I don't want to do that because I don't want to end up with 2 bullets in the back of my head. Serious. This was his serious comment about, this happened to be Russia, but the point is there's the unreasonable, I think, concern about this market, the stability, the fact that you can't do normal business, the fact that you have to, bribe officials or whatever, all those kinds of things. So I think there's that needs to change, and that will help drive the value in this market. But of course, in England, you don't have that concern. And there's more of a maturity, if you will, about the market.
And the second question from Konstantin. Technolist has just presented cloud translation TMS and their quality assurance, but in text is twice as large and as more profitable. What company would you buy? Is it a kind of offer, business offer? From he's going to sell your company, am I right with that? How much commission he will get?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I can't give A or B answer here, black or white. All these factors will come into play there, right? So that the proprietary cloud solution is useful and can be very good, but it's not unique. It may be uniquely done in their environment, but there are other such solutions. The question is, what does that provide? What kind of advantage does that provide for them in terms of the market share, in terms of revenue, and so forth? What's the history look like? I would want to see with the history of these companies. Has the revenue been steadily increasing? How new is this product? So there are many questions around it. You can't sort of say A or B. But I would caution them, to say just because you've invested in a proprietary cloud solution doesn't mean you'll get the money back by selling. That may or may not happen. So really, it's a combination of those things. I would say, on the whole, I would be more interested in a company that has a steady record of client attraction, maintenance, profitability, high margins, than I would that a company that has proprietary technology, just in general. Because proprietary technology doesn't typically stay proprietary very long, or unique very long. And the history in our business has been that the technology has never been really a differentiator. I mean, for the most part. There are small bits and pieces, but it's very hard for a company to rely. Even a company like SDL, has struggled in history about trying to sort of, drive this technology angle and be more of a technology company. So I think it's difficult for smaller companies to do that. And I would say, if I had to pick, I would rather have a steady growth, steady profitability company that's managed well and can continue to drive forward.
Yes. Thank you, Hans. Do you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, it was great. And as you mentioned yourself, it's not a secret. You have experience of selling companies. considering that and considering that most likely you didn't have all the experience you have now about selling companies, at least what you can confess, what were the to-dos that you didn't follow at that time, and what were not to-dos that you did from your own experience when selling a company? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm selling my company. What should I have done in hindsight? What should I have done? I think I was very realistic in that I wasn't expecting a big sudden wealth to come my way, and my company wasn't very big. It was under 10 million, so it was I think I probably should have bargained harder for more money at the closing, which is when you sign the papers and officially join the other company. I don't know if I would have gotten it, but Phil Shaw is very shrewd, the CEO of TransPerfect. Great guy, I like him, but he's a very good businessman. So I think the thing is that understanding that the risk of post-closing has to be carried by you and by them. And so trying very hard to make sure the risk is as equal as possible so that you don't carry more than you should, and because they're going to have control. Right? After you sell, the control goes to somebody else. So it's really important to make sure that you manage the risk properly. I think in my case that was pretty good, although I think probably it was a little more for me to have to achieve the financial gain than perhaps it should have been. But overall my experience was good. I've seen others where I think the mistake was that, sort of settle, the term settling, sort of giving up and saying, well, that's the best I can do. I think if you don't push hard until somebody at the other side says, okay, that's it, or I'm leaving, if they say, all right, you take this or I go, then you've gotten the best you can. And so, I would say that's the key. What I didn't do is I didn't prepare for the sale. I didn't spend 3 years getting ready to sell, and because I was approached suddenly by TransPerfect, and it was a bit of a personal decision too. So which it always is for owners. So I would say the more you can do to prepare for a sale and be ready and have these answers to these questions and criticize yourself and say, can I protect and defend my what I've done and what my company is worth, then you're going to be in a much better position. I think we're out of time, right? Okay. Спасибо вам большое.